Welcome to the Commit to Thrive podcast, where we have committed ourselves to the betterment of physicians, nurses, and executive leaders across the complex world of healthcare and higher education. Join Dr. Todd Redden as he engages with some of the nation's most brilliant men and women to learn leadership best practices, the secrets to personal and professional well-being, and how to build an excellent work culture across complex and ever-changing environments. Now, here's your host, Dr. Todd.
Greetings, everyone. This is Dr. Todd Redden, and I'm your host for today's Commit to Thrive podcast. I'm especially excited about today's podcast because this is the inaugural Commit to Thrive podcast, just one of the many resources that we provide through the Institute for Healthcare and Academic Leadership. Because this is our first Commit to Thrive podcast, I'm going to flip the roles from a traditional format, and I'm actually going to have our guest interview me about the podcast itself, what's unique about the Commit to Thrive podcast, and how it will be a valuable resource for physicians as well as other healthcare providers, faculty, and administrators. I'm really pumped about today's episode because we have a very special guest, Dr. Angela Edwards. Dr. Edwards is currently serving as an associate professor of anesthesiology at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. Dr. Edwards is a physician and an expert in her field of anesthesiology. She specializes in perioperative optimization through the School of Medicine. She's the director of perioperative assessment and is the section head of perioperative medicine for the Department of Anesthesiology. She has served nationally as the president for the Society for Perioperative Assessment and Quality Improvement. She's the director of their society's annual Perioperative Medicine Summit and chair of the American Society of Anesthesiologists Perioperative Medical Education Track for their national meeting. She's received numerous awards and invitations to speak nationally and internationally about her field of expertise and care for the surgical patient. She also serves as vice chair of professional affairs for the Department of Anesthesiology, which facilitates professional advancement opportunities for faculty with national organizations. I've known Angie for a number of years, and not only have I found her to be extremely busy in her clinical field, she's also influential and a brilliant leader at the local, national, and international level. She's an educator, a mentor, and a strong advocate for women in medicine. So thank you, folks, for joining us today for today's episode, and I know you'll enjoy our time together. I'd like to welcome Dr. Angela Edwards to the show, and she has been gracious enough to join us and spend some time with me in today's episode. As I mentioned in the intro, we're going to flip the roles from a traditional podcast where she's actually going to interview me so that the listener can learn more about the purpose of this podcast and what you can hope to benefit by listening to each episode. So, Angie, thank you for being here and welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm delighted. Looking forward to our conversation today and to see where you're going with this podcast.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
So, as I was thinking about how we were going to approach this, and in looking at all the podcasts that are out there, I really wanted you to share, first off, what's going to be different about this podcast? Why should listeners choose to listen to the Commit to Thrive podcast by Dr. Todd Redden?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are thousands of podcasts out there, and you can find a podcast probably for pretty much any subject that you want: facts, fictional, non-fictional, storytelling, and so forth. And I've been working with physicians for many years. I've been in healthcare for over 25 years, and I have seen the experience of physicians, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I can also attest to nurses and nurse practitioners and other, healthcare providers, but physicians specifically, I think, are a unique brand. And I say that with the utmost respect. When I think about other professions, whether you're an attorney or an accountant or even a healthcare administrator, those jobs have been pretty constant through the years. I mean, there have been software changes and laws and other facets that have changed, but the life of the physician has been in constant flux. And throughout a physician's career, from med school to residency to retirement, there's so much change that physicians have to experience. And being able to adjust to that while maintaining a joy of practicing medicine is a challenge. It doesn't matter if your primary focus is research or teaching in academia, or if you're a clinician or a leader in healthcare, your world is constantly changing and there's so much noise. And I have seen this lead to burnout. I've seen this lead to a lack of joy in medicine, early retirement. I've seen people encourage their children not to go into medicine for that very reason. And that's disheartening because as someone who has spent some time in the clinical world many years ago, who is now on my own providing professional and executive and personal coaching to physicians, leadership development and consultation. My constant work with physicians led me to recognize that there needs to be a special place where physicians can go to gain resources that will support them, make them feel better about the work they're doing, but also provide them with tools so that they could be more effective as leaders, that they could be dynamic faculty members in a dynamic learning environment, a resource where physicians can better understand the business of healthcare and medicine and learn from some experts the direction that the field is going, but also as an opportunity to help physicians take care of themselves so that they can not only provide excellent patient care, but self-care.
Wow. You nailed it. One of the things I wanted to just reiterate was that a physician's career changes so drastically over time. I used to, emphasize the first 5 years is different than the 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15, 15 to 20 year mark. But then you've got this gray zone. And if you think about it in research terms, you've got early career, mid-career. You don't really know by the time you've hit mid-career and halfway through it, you might be there.
Exactly.
Probably entered a leadership role or been given leadership opportunities and have no idea what resources you might need to continue to be successful, implement the change you want to, take better care of patients. And taking care of ourselves has never really been at the forefront of our mind. We sort of forget. Right. And so, I love this idea of having a place to go, especially in a podcast format where you can tune in when you need to. If it's 4 a.m. whenever you're either coming home from work or waking up to go to work,
right?
Or perhaps reviewing charts, and you just need something a little refreshing to remind you of what you're supposed to already know, but you might not.
That's right.
I love that idea. And so what inspired you to do this? I know you talked a little bit about your background and that you've worked with physicians before, but there has to be, and I'm sure, without divulging any specific stories, you've got some inspiration behind it. But what was the impetus for the podcast?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, podcasts are a way for me to reach populations that don't know me personally, right? So it expands my audience that allows me to touch the lives of physicians in a way that I may not be able to as a coach or as a person who develops physician leaders within academic and healthcare settings. So it expands the audience. I would say the second reason that inspired me was just recognizing the challenges that many physicians are experiencing. So I've worked with many administrators who are not physicians and many physicians who are administrators. I actually found physicians to probably be more open and accepting of being engaging in personal and professional development more so than non-physicians. And I believe the reason for that is physicians recognize where their expertise lies. And then when they need to grow, they're intellectually curious. They want to be the best that they could be. Physicians are type A. Physicians are competitive. You got to own it. Yep, but the other thing that physicians are is they're horrible patients. They're not great at taking care of themselves, right? Because they've committed so much time to their profession, to their colleagues, to the field of a knowledge base of medicine. And then they're also able to weave in some time for family, and it leaves very little time for themselves. So part of what inspired me to do this podcast is really provide a conduit for physicians to be able to remember that they are also of importance and that they cannot be a fantastic physician or a fantastic educator or spouse, or parent if they're not taking care of themselves. Now, this is not just about teaching physicians to take care of themselves, but beyond that, helping them be the best they can be in the classroom and in the leadership roles and so forth. So, you know, there are a lot of people out there that would say physicians only want to hear from physicians. I'm not a physician. My doctoral degree is in leadership, but all of the years that I've spent working with physicians, either coaching or developing them as leaders, I ran a med staff services office, I ran a research division, I ran a physician education division, and I've worked with some of the largest healthcare institutions across the nation. And I have seen a consistent pattern of physicians being open to development, but oftentimes institutions are not engaging in their development. So I want to be a resource for physicians to take care of themselves and to develop them to be the best that they could be. And that's why I named the podcast Commit to Thrive, is because I want physicians to be able to commit to themselves that they're not just going to survive this chaotic, crazy, changing healthcare environment, but they're actually going to thrive in every area.
You know, I love the fact that you've worked with such a diverse group before, because a lot of our budding leaders are now entering the era of having to work with administration, and when it's new, it's hard to figure out background, and I think, from my perspective, I think this would be a great resource for physicians who are entering those leadership roles, where it's new to work with folks who have been in business, who have been in healthcare leadership for years, decades even.
Right.
And all of a sudden you have a new, budding leader who's trying to figure out how to navigate that space and thrive in it.
Yeah, I agree. What I have found, go ahead.
I can see why it would be beneficial for physicians to listen to this, but I think also it would be beneficial for all clinicians. We've got a lot of incredible leaders, in addition to physicians, who are entering the space, and it's a multidisciplinary engagement. So, thriving also means, I think, respecting others and having an understanding of others. And I think in leadership, that's kind of where we have to go. So I love this idea that this is going to be out there. I can't wait to tune into the first episode. And so, we touched a little bit on this, but I want to give you an opportunity to expand more.
Okay.
As I'm thinking, you probably got a lineup of speakers and a lineup of a curriculum. What do you hope, if there are just a few take-home points, what do you hope your listeners are going to gain out of listening to the podcast series?
Yeah. I really, first of all, want them to be able to enjoy content that's relatable. Okay. So whether they're just getting into a leadership role or if they're a seasoned leader, I want this to be something for everyone. There may be some episodes that are very specific to, let's say, the creating a dynamic learning environment within an academic setting. You may have a physician that's purely clinical that think that they may not be able to benefit from that episode, but I want them to listen because physicians set culture. Physicians are leaders by default. Physicians are teachers by default because people are constantly looking at physicians, whether they want, that role or not. When a physician walks into the room, the heads turn. The patient looks to the physician as the expert in the room. The family looks to the physician as the expert in the room. The clinical staff that's sharing as part of that treatment team is looking to the physician for leadership. And that physician is either going to create a great, healthy, inclusive culture, or is going to undermine that type of culture. So regardless of the topic, I do believe that there is something here for everyone. And as you mentioned, and I appreciate you mentioning that, while the majority of my work, probably 85% of my work, is with physicians, I also work with nurses, nurse leaders, and other types of healthcare providers and administrators. So I do believe that there'll be something here for everyone. Sometimes it will be topical in nature. Other times I will bring in guests who have a particular expertise, or maybe they've written a book and they can talk about that book and the benefits of that book, of how it can help physicians like yourself as well as other clinical leaders.
I have some great books for you, some great authors I want to hear you interview. How's that?
Be great. Send my way.
I got a top 5 list.
Excellent.
Again, I love this is going to be out there because just having something to listen to quickly, I think we've there are a lot of podcasts out there, and so we might spend a couple minutes picking and choosing, but the something that is relatable, that has the content that's digestible and gives us a little background so we can thrive through our day and not just get
Right.
through it. Perhaps providing some inspiration and information at the same time is vital. It breaks my heart to see, so many podcasts out there on, exit strategies and how to get out of medicine rather than how to stay in it and thrive in it.
Right.
I love this idea. And, so on that note, I just wanted to ask, so for those who are probably curious, for sometimes podcasts, there's a fee associated. Is there a cost to joining it or a subscription that we have to do or a link that we have to click to kind of get on board?
Not at all. This will never have an expense associated with it. It's free of charge. The only thing I would ask is people share the show. That's the fee, is that people share the show. The many physician leaders that I've worked with, I think most would attest that it comes with about 25 to 30% experience and 70 to 75% scar tissue. And I want there to be less scar tissue in the experience of leadership. I want to be able to provide physicians with the resources that are needed, not only to effectively lead within the healthcare culture, but also to take care of themselves in doing that. So as I mentioned earlier, I think physicians are hungry for development. You're intellectually curious, and you want to be the best that you can be at the top of your game. So I have found physicians to be open to learning and developing. Those that aren't probably are challenged and may not do quite as well in their field. But most physicians that I've run across are open to development. So I want to be able to provide this podcast at no cost whatsoever so that it could be a valuable resource.
I love this idea. So before we wrap up today, I want to ask you for perhaps a story, if you can, that gives us some background as to why you're qualified to give this podcast, what your background is. You talked a lot earlier about that, but maybe something a little more granular story, if you can share without divulging too much. I love the fact that you've worked with both administrators, physicians, other clinicians in the space. And so maybe there's something that comes to mind that's just a quick wrap-up story to give us sort of a little, maybe a teaser or a little sample of what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question because anyone can start a podcast, but not everyone is experienced enough to be able to be a content subject matter expert. And as I mentioned earlier, my clinical background is in psychiatry, behavioral health. And I worked independently for a number of years. I've worked in public mental health for a number of years, but I started working in a hospital setting, and that was my first experience in working directly with physician colleagues. And I started recognizing that the physician culture was one of, wearing as a badge of honor long hours and hard work and personal and professional sacrifice. And I think that while our culture has changed in a way that we recognize, so for instance, the limited hours on residencies, right, has changed. When you went through residency, they probably didn't limit your hours. You worked and worked. And I see trauma surgeons who wear as a badge of honor, I've been awake for the last 36 hours. And I just see that burnout. I've had physician friends who have committed suicide. I've had physician friends who have died an early death as a result of chronic disease and the associated comorbidities that come with that. And I have had physicians in my office in tears because they felt like an EMR, electronic medical record, was dangerous to a patient because it was such a challenge for physicians to be able to use without the adequate training and resources. So I have seen the good, the bad, the ugly in the frontline physician's life as well as physician leaders. So having worked so closely with physicians has become a population that I have a soft spot for. It's having worked on call and got up in the middle of the night and gone to the emergency department and provided psychiatric assessments and carried the beeper, and just I was in the an elevator not long ago, and a resident was wearing the old Metro, whatever, the Motorola pager, and that tone went off. And the tone, I don't know, I wish Motorola would change their tone because that tone has never changed for 50 years.
Yeah.
And even today, as long as it has been since I've had to crawl out of bed in the middle of the night, when that pager went off, it sent chills down my spine. So having worked hand in hand with physicians, experienced the challenges that physicians and physician leaders experience. And it's not all bad. I have seen the joys of practicing medicine. I've seen physicians, show such appreciation when they're recognized and identified as leaders locally and nationally. But the resources and investment that healthcare administrators and healthcare organizations put into physicians is nominal. And I believe that the important is often put on the back burner, and the urgent is usually what gets our attention. And I think the work that we're doing through the Institute for Healthcare and Academic Leadership and through this podcast is the important stuff. It's not a burning platform. It's not considered to be urgent, but I think it's so important in order to help grow and support the physician population. So that's why I chose this population. And having worked for many years alongside physicians, and having the expertise in leadership and the experience in leadership development and coaching I have, led me to just focus primarily in this field and provide the organization of which I founded and this podcast.
I love it.
Answers your question.
It does. And actually, I was riveted when you said, and I probably should have written this down because it resonated with me. It's not considered necessarily important urgent at the time, but I would pause there and say, no, I think it is. I think it's urgent that physicians have a lot of resources out there, because you don't know what you don't know unless it hits you in the face that, hey, you need this. This is good for you.
Right.
Just take a listen. You might get something out of it. Give it, 5 or 6 tries and see what happens. I think it's an opportunity to thrive. So I think the urgency is that we need to thrive where we are. I heard a colleague recently say that I love this when it came to leadership, because, leadership's not always about titles or what you're supposed to be doing in the job description you have necessarily. You need to lead from where you are. And so what does that look like? How do we do that? We're not taught that in medical school. We're not taught that in residency. We're just trying to survive and learn whatever which way we can.
Right.
And you get out and all of a sudden you have this job to do, this role. Yeah. And it's always been about patient care, but then there's everything else.
Right.
So thrive with everything else. And so I would argue, I think it's urgent that we learn to thrive, and we have resources to thrive, to take better care of patients and take better care of ourselves.
Absolutely. And I hope everyone will share the show, because there are many frontline physician leaders who I've worked with, medical directors, associate medical directors within the ambulatory setting, that were thrust into leadership positions and were ill prepared. Oftentimes, these physicians end up in leadership roles because they missed the meeting and everyone nominated them to the next leader, or they're next in, it's their turn. Everyone else is served.
This job, and we need you to take it, because
right.
You're young enough to go, okay, sure.
That's right.
Sure, of course I'll do that.
That's right. And we may or may not compensate you with a small stipend, but we're not going to invest in you, and we're not going to develop you. The orientation is very limited, and that onboarding is so important in that process. So organizations are going to have to develop in their leaders. And fortunately, organizations bring me in to work with physicians, but I would say that there's room for so much more growth, whether it's me or someone else that does what I do. There's a significant need.
And I would think also when you say that there's a significant need across the board for all of our leaders.
Mhm.
We need to figure out how to work better together, whether it's administration,
Right.
whether it's nursing, whether it's advanced practice providers that are incredibly talented in the space of leadership. I think there's room for all. We just need to figure out, how to navigate that together. So, Todd,
Right.
I thank you for today for letting me
Absolutely.
ask these rather direct questions, unfiltered, and that last one especially. Um, I hope this goes well. I'm sure it will be shared widely, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Angie. I appreciate your time, and it's an honor to be with you today, and look forward to connecting with you and having you back as a guest on our show.
Anytime, I'd love to. Love to
Thank
hear
you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Commit to Thrive podcast. I especially want to thank our guest, Angela Edwards, for her time, expertise, and contribution to today's show. We'll continue to offer this show at no cost to the listener and simply ask that you share the show. Share the show with your colleagues, academic faculty, nurse leaders, and anyone else who you believe will benefit from the resources of the podcast, as well as the Institute for Healthcare and Academic Leadership. Until next time, this is your host, Dr. Todd, wishing you well and encouraging you to take care of you in every facet of your life as you commit to thrive.
That's all for this episode of the Commit to Thrive podcast. We hope you can take away something from this episode that can positively impact your life or those you're in contact with on a daily basis. If you enjoyed this episode, we simply ask that you share the show. To listen to more episodes, please visit our website at ihaleadership.org. Until next time, thank you for listening.